He is one of the founding members of a band that would go on to sell over 40 million albums in the U.S. alone, with 23 gold, 18 platinum, and 8 multi-platinum albums, also scoring 5 number-one hit albums and 20 top 10 singles. Founding member musician Walt Parazaider of the band Chicago. Walt, how we doing, my friend?
Wow, what an intro. I'm just fine, JJ. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it. I know you grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and you began playing the clarinet at a really early age and received actually a degree in classic clarinet performance. And what inspired you to change from playing the clarinet to sax?
Well, I did start with the clarinet, and I was the protege of one of the clarinetists in the Chicago Symphony. He was headed that way. But to tell you the truth, to get to the point of that question, I happened to go to a rock and roll dance at about the age of 12, and I saw that the saxophone players got girls. So, and my dad was a musician. He was a trumpet player, 6'5" trumpet player for about 70 years, and he had a band, and I said, geez, with the saxophone player in your band, want to teach me a few things on the saxophone? And I didn't want to say what my ulterior motive was, but, I ended up playing in rock and roll bands and different bands and started playing in clubs at about 13 years old.
And I know there was a particular song that you heard for the very first time that went on to change your life forever. The Beatles song, Got to Get You Into My Life. What's the story and inspiration behind that song that changed your life musically?
Well, that's a wild question that you would ask that, because I was talking with Joe Mantegna a couple bands ago, but before the Chicago band. He was in a band. He was a lead singer and a bass player in a band called the Apocryphals in Chicago. And I heard that song, Got to Get You Into My Life, with the horns. And he says, "What are you going to do?" He says, "You've always been in bands that have been, bigger than my bands, and I've been real looked up to you and all that stuff." And I says, "I'd like to make the Beatles with horns, a band that was the Beatles with horns."
It was so funny. I'm just driving into the studio this afternoon, and I'm coming down PCH, and I'm listening to a station out of San Diego that's just like a powerhouse station. And Chicago, If You Leave Me Now, comes on. And even the slower music that Chicago produced and composed, I mean, there are so many different elements to a Chicago song, period.
That's it. It's true, and it was just an idea that I had, along the way we just thought, the James Brown and all the bands that had the R&B bands, had horns, but they were sort of an accompaniment, and we wanted to make the horns an integral part of the band and of a band, and that's we sure did, and thanks to you playing all the nice music, and those people out there listening to me right now, who I thank for the support. We've had a wonderful career, and we've been allowed to do something we love to do.
Speaking of musical energy, what was that energy like the very first time that you were playing with Terry Kath and also Danny in your home there in Chicago during the early days? What was that like?
Well, that was, you had Terry Kath and Danny Seraphin there, and you also had Lee Loughnane on trumpet and Jimmy Pankow on trombone, and then we were in the basement of my parents' house. And tell you the truth, with that lineup right there, the horns are still together after all these years. And for 47 years, there's been no standing horn section in the history of music that's lasted even half that long. So we're real proud of that. But to get the answer of your question there, when we started playing, I think we played a James Brown tune, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, and we passed the solos around and everything. And to tell you the truth, outside of the stove upstairs that my dad was holding onto that almost fell over in the kitchen, all of us just, knew we had something special. The energy was incredible. The enthusiasm was terrific. And, we basically just made a pact to see this through and to be the best band that we possibly could ever be.
And I'm guessing the original band name, The Big Thing, kind of probably had to do with that big sound. Is that right?
Well, it was, but there was also 6 of us at that time. And there was a fellow in Chicago that was helping, I was booking the band also, and who was helping me out, giving me some pointers. And he sort of had that Chicago accent and said, "Thing this, thing that." He says, "There's a lot of you." And everything. And everybody says "thing" today, and this was back in 1967. "Thing this, thing that." And he says, "And there's a lot of you, so maybe we should call you The Big Thing." So it was basically because of the numbers. And a fellow that sort of named us at that time, and of course we went through the transition from Chicago Transit Authority after that, the name of the bus line and Rapid Transit line in Chicago, and then shortened it to Chicago because we were all from the city of Chicago and learned our craft there.
Very cool. And Walter, I do have to ask you this question because I read this in a book a long time ago that you guys were okay, how do I put this? You guys were originally Chicago Transit Authority, and then were you guys about to get sued because you used the city's name, or no?
You're right, JJ. It was funny because it was they started looking at that, and we're going to do something about it because the Chicago Transit Authority was what it was. And later on, after we had some hits, and I think it was, does anybody really know what time it is? We came back to them because they weren't paying royalties on it, and we thought, well, push comes to shove, we're even on this whole thing. We'll just no one got hurt, and we both went on our way. But there was talk about them, stopping using the name, and it was, as the reason that we did it in our liner notes at the end of the first album was just call them for the name for the city that they were born in and learn their music, Chicago.
Speaking of the tune, does anybody really know what time it is? And keyboardist Robert Lamb wrote the lyrics, and you laid down some wonderful horn arrangements on that particular tune. Tell me the story behind. Does anybody know what really time it is?
Well, I couldn't really speak to what Robert had in his mind when he did that very creative. He's been so creative with all of the lyrics and the music that he's written. It sounds like it's a song about time, but I don't think that there's a thing about it. Does anybody really care about time? And I think that was sort of Robert's idea on it. But Jimmy Pankow, who's written quite a few of the horn arrangements, wrote the horns for that. And I'll relay that nice, kind compliment that you gave him for that. And it was really fun to do. And to tell you the truth, the real cool thing about it was the first song that we ever recorded as a band.
Wow, how cool. How very, very cool. And I know, Walt, you don't only play sax and clarinet, but you came up with some beautiful flute arrangements on the tune Color My World. Tell me about that.
Well, we moved out to L.A. in 1968, and I happened to be at home with my wife, who's still put up with me and I'm thankful for it, for 47 years now. And my daughter, we were living in a little apartment, and Jimmy called me up, Jimmy Pankow, and he was writing this whole piece, Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan, which two hit singles came off of that, Make Me Smile, which was our first single, and also Color My World. But at this time, he just said to me, Walt, he says, would you want to come down and bring your flute? He says, I've got this idea for a ballad and a movement of the ballet, and come on down and let's see what we could hash out. And I went down there, and he was playing some arpeggios, and after about 2 hours, something like that, he had a real deranged look on his face, sort of very a la Mozart, and he looked at me very quizzically, and he said, is this any bleep bleep good? And just being a positive person, and we were all too young and stupid and scared to think that we wouldn't succeed. I looked at him when he said, is this any good? And I said, you know what? It'll make me famous.
And what was your personal experience like working with the legendary producer, David Foster, that produced so many great albums for the band Chicago?
Oh, we had a lot of fun with David. He was very meticulous in his production, but he also, he utilized the band, and we had a great time. But he was one of those guys that really wanted a good performance out of it, and he knew how to get those performances out of each individual in the band in his own certain way, and that's one of the keys to a good producer.
And I always loved the horn arrangements on the tune "Hard Habit to Break." What a great song that is!
Well, it really was, and it seems like yesterday we recorded it, and I remember that when we put the horns on there, and those horn parts which really gave it that real horn type sound for Chicago. That and even though it was subtle, he said, I would just want to put some lines in here that'll really identify this with Chicago. And I think he did that, and we were happy to record it, and boy, we were sure fortunate to have a great big hit with that song.
The other big 80s hit for Chicago was a tune titled You're the Inspiration, and I've heard from multiple sources that that song was written for Kenny Rogers. Tell me about that.
You know, that's a wild thing, and that you mentioned that. We recorded at Kenny Rogers' studio in L.A.
Okay.
When he had a studio. So I think that's how that rumor got started. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I don't know if it went by any further than that. We were just, that's the only connection I can think of, is that we were at the studio there, and, a couple guys, wrote that song, and I don't know if we recorded the tune there, but we had recorded at Kenny Rogers' studio, and I just wonder if that's how it was one of those musical rumors that gets started, or whatever. But that's about all I know about that.
Okay, because what I heard, and I've just read it from, internet sources, David Foster was in the recording studio with Kenny Rogers. Kenny Rogers said, call Peter Cetera up. I need a song from him like today. Peter was on his way over to Italy somewhere, and he said, no. And David's like, Peter, no, get off the plane, walk off the plane, come over to the studio. We need to write a song for Kenny. And for whatever reason, Peter and Foster, I think, co-wrote that tune together there in the studio. And then I heard that Kenny was too busy or didn't like the arrangement. And Peter's just like, hey, I'll just change a couple things and, we'll have a top 10 hit.
Well, you know what? Saxophone players are sometimes the last to know, and that sounds pretty good to me, JJ.
I got it.
It could have been after they got that tune, then they said, oh, the heck with Kenny Rogers, we'll give it to ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I have to say, your explanation, I'll go with that one.
And Look Away was originally written by the great songwriter Diane Warren, correct?
Yes.
And
yes.
And how did you guys get your hands on Look Away?
Well, we knew her through different producers, and and she at the time was just starting to produce write quite a few hit songs. We were fortunate enough to have her be gracious enough to give us that song, and that was actually the song of the year. Look Away was, and my gosh, that would have been in the 80s, and we certainly were glad that she laid that great tune on us.
And Walter, tell me about this new Chicago album and this great tour that you guys are on.
Well, the Chicago album is now Chicago 36. We're up to number 36. Where, we recorded that on the road with a thing we call the rig, and Lee Loughnane was real instrumental in that. It's a portable recording studio that you can use, and we basically did the album on just about in a lot of cities in the United States and all over the world, and you can do it anywhere from on a bus to hotel rooms, and it was a lot of hotel rooms that we did it in, and that rig, it sounds as good as any studio, if I might flatter ourselves, because I'm very proud of the album. It was a lot of fun to do, but that's how the album was recorded, and you can get that at chicagotheband.com or chicago/now.com. Just for a little plug there, if you don't mind me saying that, JJ. But we're really proud and want to share that with people. It's new music from us, and it's real exciting, and we want to let people to see what we're up to right at this minute, to tell you the truth. So, as I say, we're very proud of it, and we're very happy to be partnering up with REO Speedwagon. Kevin Cronin, who was a former neighbor of mine in the San Fernando Valley, a good Chicago guy, and we'll be at the Greek Theater the 1st of August. So, we'd invite everybody to come slumming and see a couple of Chicago bands having a good time, and we're going to do that for the whole summer, for a summer tour into the fall, and we're real excited about that.
Absolutely. Chicago and REO Speedwagon will be performing live at the Greek Theater on Friday, August 1st. For more information on Walter and the band Chicago, please visit chicagotheband.com. Mr. Walter Parazaider of Chicago, thank you so very much. I really appreciate it, my friend.
It's really been a blast, JJ.